Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. This week we continue our look at the legislative session that kicked off on Tuesday, and we do that with an exclusive interview with House Speaker Murrell Smith, who spoke with me and South Carolina Public Radio reporter Maayan Schechter on January 9th during our live taping of the South Carolina Lead podcast. I opened by asking Smith to give us an overview of his position and what it entails when it comes to governing the 124-member House chamber.
Yeah, well, first, let me say it's an honor to serve the citizens of South Carolina in that position. I'm obviously a representative. I'm elected from District 67 in Sumter County, and I had the pleasure of being elected as Speaker in 2022. Finished a little bit of the term in 2022 when the former Speaker resigned, and then started my own term thereafter. But the Speaker is a unique position in South Carolina. And I can tell you what I always tell people is the one thing that I've learned quickly about that is I gained 123 new constituents, and they are a whole lot more needy than my constituents back in Sumter County. And so you obviously have to deal with members, and it's the House is obviously you've got employees and people who staff committees and work in the operations of the House, and the Speaker is the head of the operations of the House, which are delegated to the clerk and a number of others to handle. And then I have to preside over the chamber. Have to wear a purple robe every once in a while. I don't look real good in purple, and then also. Make committee assignments, and that's probably one of the most important things. And then every piece of legislation that is introduced is I have to assign it to a standing committee and determine what standing committee would have jurisdiction over that and do that. And then, we also have to deal with some HR issues every once in a while. Fortunately, it's not the members so far in my tenure, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But it's a lot of responsibility. But at the end of the day, it's an honor. And what I heard Adrian mention in the beginning is I'm the 61st person that has been Speaker of the South Carolina House of Representatives since we became a state. Mm-hmm. And that's you think about that. That's an honor to be one of 61 people who served. And I always want to make sure that the institution is served with honor and integrity, and that's one issue that I've really tried to make sure of, that we are really concentrating on maintaining the integrity and the decorum in our institution.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the start of the first year of a 2-year session. You've got a lot of priorities this year. We'll dive deeper into them, but could you just give us quick 1 to 2 sentences, if it works, of what your top priorities are for this legislative session?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Hurricane Helene is we're going to have to work on making sure that we fund that appropriately. That upstate, especially in some of the western areas, were devastated by that. Probably some of the worst damage that they've seen in the history of the state. And so we got to make sure that we repair that immediately. And obviously there's a FEMA match, and I think we're trying to work through that. The good news is that at the end of the year, Congress passed a relief bill, and we're trying to dissect that right now, determine how much money is going to come from there. But first and foremost, we need to clean up and repair ourselves from Helene. Number two, another issue, and I've talked about a lot, and we'll talk about it in more detail, I presume, but I think tax relief is a big issue. South Carolina has the highest income tax rate not in the country, but in the Southeast, and one of the highest in the country. And we can talk about low tax state. We are a low tax state, and that's something I'm very proud of. But when you look at when we're competing with our neighbors, and we're competing with people all over the country for jobs and industries and employers to come and move here. And when they Google South Carolina, and you see that it's 6.2% tax income rate, and North Carolina is now at 4.45%, moving to 3.99. Georgia similarly is moving below 5%. It's time for us to be competitive with our neighbors, because our neighbors are who we're competing with for jobs and for industries in this Southeast region recently.
And Speaker, when we're talking about what state economists are forecasting for budget growth, they're projecting strong revenue growth in one-time dollars, while also acknowledging that the revenue is about to stabilize, and we're coming off that sugar high from all those big spending bills from COVID-19 and such from the federal government. But how does this shape your approach to where you think the budget should go? Obviously, you're not over the budget, but in some ways you are in some ways. So how do you see where revenues are going affecting the budget this year?
Well, I think the revenues are continuing to increase. As we have $540 million of new recurring money out of a $14 billion budget. And other states right now are really having to make cuts in their budgets. Their revenue is really trailing off, and some states are in the negative. And South Carolina, fortunately, is not that right now. Right now, we have continued to see growth. We have continued to see jobs. We continue to see revenue. And that is because of our economy. And our economy is something that has really been resilient. But we're fortunate and unfortunate in the same term of having a lot of people are moving here and locating their businesses here, and that's great. And as long as people are continuing to move here and job creation is still occurring here, that I think we have a promising future. But with that is going to be more infrastructure, more things that we're going to have to deal with as we are a growing state.
You talked about the income tax rate cut. What rate would make you happy? What would you like to see the legislature do this year? And on top of that, some Senate leaders have said that they'd like to see a more holistic approach. Now, what is included in that holistic approach remains to be seen. Do you think that there is an appetite to look at everything as well?
I think there's an absolute appetite to look at everything as well. And we've done that in the past. And what you find is that when you weight it down with a holistic approach, then it really dies under its own weight at some point because it accumulates more people who are opposed to it. That's why what we're looking at is going just to the income tax right now. We need to have an overhaul of our entire tax system. It's antiquated. It's time for us to reform that. But right now, we need to look at the income tax because it's a competitiveness issue for us. And what I would like to do, I would like for it to be at zero. I don't think we have to tax income. But right now, we need to be competitive with our neighbors, and that means less than our neighbors' tax rate. So I would look in the 3 to 4% range, start with having triggers like every other state's doing and bringing it down eventually to zero.
So multi-phase?
Yes.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, because we've seen holistic approaches to reducing taxes and analyzing taxes in the past, and it doesn't seem like it ever really goes anywhere. What do you think the speed bumps are, and do you think everyone's on the same page now to actually make some movements on that?
Well, I think everybody agrees we need to lower our tax rate. The devil's in the detail, and we have been working on this for a couple months now, and it is not an easy task. There are a lot of road bumps, speed bumps in the road, as you say, and we're trying to work through that. And the goal is to flatten the tax and not have a progressive income tax, but have one flat rate. And you have to broaden the base. Right now, 42% of South Carolinians do not pay income taxes. And that's because we're on this federal taxable income. You start off at federal taxable income instead of your AGI, and the federal government then basically dictates tax policy to us, to which we have to follow. And so I think we really need to make that switch to adjusted gross income, and we need to continue to push down that rate.
But then, Speaker Smith, when we talk about that and we change the tax structure here and we change how money gets into the budget, are there any concerns that we're already not funding enough of the state agencies to what they need? How do you make up that shortfall?
You take this out of growth. And we've had good growth over the years, and you put these triggers in when you can afford it, when you have in years like currently we are at 6.2%, and we to go down if we have revenue growth of more than 5%. And so that lets you still be able to fund government and be able to reduce taxes.
Another big issue that we're going to see this year is obviously the debate over school choice expansion, which y'all already had this year, but the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional. The Senate has started sort of a miniature debate. They say it's going to be the first thing out the gate this year. But they want to pay for these private school vouchers using state lottery dollars. Is that something the House is going to agree with, you think?
I think the House is going to analyze anything that can move the issue forward for education savings accounts and for choice. I think, obviously, our body has been very strong advocates for school choice. And now whether the lottery revenue is a sustainable mechanism moving forward, I have some concerns about that. But, at the end of the day, my biggest concern right now is we have families and 5,000 children that are now enrolled in school and all of a sudden had the rug pulled out from under them by the Supreme Court, and now they have, in the middle of their educational year with their children, have to make a choice. Can we leave them in private school, or do we have to remove them and put them in a new school mid-school year? And so I think the lottery may be a way for us to plug a short-term gap, but long-term lottery revenues are continuing to taper off because of the high from COVID, and not everybody's buying lottery tickets anymore. And so I think we need to be careful about that, because we've made certain commitments to the colleges and to the schools and to the technical schools, which are very critical for the success of our state.
But likely any bill that winds up passing and the governor signs into law will have to probably go back before the state Supreme Court. So anything that y'all plan to pass would probably pass this year?
Yes, I think so. And the Senate is taking the lead, which is fine with us in the House, and we've had discussions with them, and we'll be ready when they send it to us to act quickly.
Speaker Smith, talk to us about energy reform and utilities and the need for this growing demand for energy in the state. Obviously, we've been seeing a lot of growth with advanced manufacturing in the state, data centers moving here. We saw the governor earlier today. He was talking about the South Carolina Economic Developers Summit. He even mentioned coal being a solution to help feed this demand. I don't think that's going to happen after what we've seen so many of these plants go offline. But, there's talk about bringing VC Summer back, that $9 billion boondoggle. I mean, that's something that, we're seeing up in with 3 Mile Island when Microsoft is talking about bringing that reactor coming back online. So walk us through the situation here with this demand for energy in the state and where we are right now and the need for more of it.
Well, right now, we're at a critical juncture of almost not being able to service the energy needs of South Carolina. And like you mentioned, we've done a great job of recruiting industry, but they are high-end users of power. And when you're growing a population as well, there's more demand for power. So, we'll see how it works out for us over this next few days. We're going to be in the 20s for a sustainable period of time. If the sun doesn't come out, we're going to have some problems.
It's going to be like the state of Texas, hopefully.
So I hope we don't have rolling blackouts. But people don't understand how critical this issue is right now. And we are having to buy power from Georgia and from North Carolina. And that is not what we need. We need to be self-sufficient. And so, I'm not here to say there's one magic bullet or a silver bullet that's going to solve the problems, but we need to invest in anything that creates energy. I'm an all above approach with that, and so I think that's what we need to do. Georgia it cost them a lot of money, but they completed their Vogtle nuclear reactors, who had the same problem we had with their contractors, and they are looking to start up 2 to 4 more of those and to help keep up with the demand in Georgia. And so I really hope we take a hard look at restarting these nuclear reactors. I would like to see that, with it not putting the taxpayers or the ratepayers at risk. Mm-hmm. There are, you mentioned Microsoft. There are a lot of private investors who would want to do that and assume that risk. There's money at the Department of Energy for loans to try to restart nuclear right now. So I think that we need to take a measured approach to everything, and we need to incentivize and create more generation. And we also need to make that come online much quicker. We have a burdensome regulatory environment. We need to reform that. That's going to be reformed at the federal level with the new administration coming in, and we need to do our part to make sure we can do that in South Carolina.
And we saw the Senate dealing with a lot of those meetings in the off session since you guys tried to get that bill through. Last year was a heavy bill. It's a big bill that they read through. But why is this so incumbent upon the legislature to do something? Why isn't this just something that we can leave up to the private industry to take care of?
Well, South Carolina is, per our Constitution, is the one that regulates utilities. and we grant service areas to the utility. So we are basically in charge of the power system in South Carolina, and we delegate that authority down to the Public Service Commission, and then we grant service areas, and then we also have the electric cooperatives, which are created by statute. So we need to be setting the policy for South Carolina, and for that to be carried out by those that we delegate those responsibilities to.
Another issue that you've had as even like a personal priority passion to get through that did not survive this past year, I want to mention, is a bill that got very close to the governor's desk, as you know, that would have consolidated the 6 state public health agencies into one office. And that bill died due to a procedural move by the Hardline House Freedom Caucus. A similar bill has been filed this year. Do you see that going through? Will we have a consolidation law signed by the governor this year?
Well, I hope we have a consolidation law, because for those who oppose consolidation, that is probably one of the most fractured healthcare delivery systems that we have in the country. And I can't tell you the number of times that you have dual diagnosis. You have people who have disability and special needs services, and some who have mental health services, and they overlap, or even with Department of Social Services to some degree. And what happens is when they need treatment, it is the finger pointing. Well, that's really not our job, it's their job. And so not having a system that it can deliver for the needs of the citizens of the state only harms the citizens. It doesn't harm the legislators or the government. It harms people who need health care. And so I'm very passionate about that. You know, we got caught up into a bumper sticker politic name of Health Czar, and we were creating powers and from all the COVID that we had. And I don't think anybody in the General Assembly wants to create someone that can lock down South Carolina, or that can mandate vaccines and things to that effect. But at the end of the day, that was a very small part of it. And I do think that there's a push in the Senate and a will in the Senate to consolidate, and there's a will for us to consolidate. We would like to stay out of having this debate all over again about mandates and vaccines and things to that effect. There's a medical freedom bill that was working its way through the Senate, and we'll probably be dealing with that at some point. But we need to segregate those two issues. We need to make sure we consolidate and provide the best health delivery service that we can in this state, and then we can deal with the medical freedom on another bill. So we will see what happens there and what it looks like. The governor now is advocating that we just give him the appointments, and he'll do that, and certainly we'll try to consider that, but I think ideally we would like to consolidate.
Speaker Smith, we have about 5 minutes left. We have a couple more questions, but I want to follow up a little bit about that when we're talking about that bill and how that got objected to. And we're talking about the House Freedom Caucus. You're talking about 124 people, including you in the House chamber. A lot of personalities, a lot of divisions in some respects. You guys do have a supermajority as Republicans, but there's about 17 members of the far-right House Freedom Caucus. You were challenged for your speakership. You obviously got reelected easily, but I want to ask you if there's some similarities there, because I feel like we're always talking about differences, but where are there similarities? Where can you guys work on things, whether it's closed primaries, reducing taxes, ending joint and several liability, the sexiest topic that we could talk about. But is there common ground, and how do you navigate that?
There is common ground, and they have a new chairman this year, and he is a policy guy, and he is, I think, committed to trying to make South Carolina better. And I've had discussions with him, and we're trying to find common ground with him and his caucus, as we are with every other caucus. We got families of caucuses, we got Democrat caucuses, and we're trying to. The thing that I like about South Carolina is we're not Congress. We don't hate each other, and we don't say let political divisions and ideology separate our friendship. And we know each other. It's a small state, and so I want to make sure that I try to govern by collaboration, and that's I'll work with anybody who wants to work to make South Carolina better and who wants to be reasonable. And I think that hopefully we'll have a chance to kind of put the gamesmanship down and the rhetoric, and let's concentrate on policy.
And I want to follow up with that by looking into Washington too, where you have the trifecta for Republicans. You have the House, the Senate, now you have the White House. You supported President-elect Donald Trump. And throughout the primary process, you're up in New Hampshire with him. You're close with him. We have a lot of other folks who are close with him in the state, too. We also have Senator Lindsey Graham, who's over the Budget Committee. Senator Tim Scott's over the Banking Committee. A lot going for South Carolina. So how important is this relationship going to be with Washington for the next couple of years?
Oh, I think it's critical. And I'm so excited about the new administration coming in, because what we're going to have, first and foremost, all the lawsuits in South Carolina suing the federal government will probably stop, so they'll save us some money on legal bills. But also, I mean, you think that what they're going to do is states are the best incubators for good ideas, in my opinion. And I think that what I understand is that they are going to return some of the power back to the states and let the states dictate the policy, not send money with policy and with conditions, but continue the money that comes in here, and don't worry about dictating how you spend it, where you spend it, and what programs you have to implement to spend it. Let you all make the decisions what's best for South Carolina, because what's best for South Carolina is not going to work in California and any other state. So I think we've got a golden opportunity here for the next 2 years to work with the administration, to work with our senators and our House of Representatives, and to try to make sure that we do what's right for South Carolina.
We have about 2 minutes left here, so I want to ask you just really quickly some top priorities that we could see maybe immediately moving out of the House. Obviously, we're talking about education in the Senate. What could we see moving quickly out of the House?
I think you'll see energy come up first, and we passed that bill overwhelmingly last year and got pretty much the same body, and so I would expect that we'd be able to have a similar vote. So I think that's going to be the first bill that you'll see on the floor. And as you know, we have with session and starting a new session, the work's going to happen in the first few weeks in committee, so we get the bills to the floor. So I think that's going to be the first bill that you'll see on the floor.
Mm-hmm. And then also just getting a focus on infrastructure as well, and that's going to be all through the budget, assume.
That's a budget issue. There's some ideas that we have on reforming the procurement process and how we can speed up some of that. And I think that you'll see some bills introduced or that may have already been introduced to help improve that process. But at the end of the day, we have to continue to grow our infrastructure. As someone who went and watched the South Carolina Gamecocks play in Orlando at the Citrus Bowl and spent 4 hours and 10 minutes trying to get out of South Carolina on I-95, I sure hope we start widening I-95 sometime soon.
All right, that's House Speaker Merle Smith. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was the first week of the 126th South Carolina General Assembly that gaveled in Tuesday at the State House in Columbia, and will continue to meet Tuesday through Thursday until May 8th. Here's a short recap of the first week. The cameras were rolling at noon on Tuesday as the 126th session of the General Assembly gaveled in at the State House in Columbia.
Members and guests, please rise as we led in prayer by our chaplain and be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
All 46 senators and 124 House members were back and filing hundreds of bills this week. But the main focus of House and Senate leadership is on energy generation needs, tax reforms, and education. Where in the Senate, the school voucher bill using lottery funds to skirt the state's constitutional prohibition on public dollars funding private schools kicked off debate, which started on Wednesday in the Senate.
About 30 private colleges in South Carolina that access those funds. So it's not, the court says that's different. That's not a problem in Edison. And the Edison court says you can do that because that money's not part of general tax revenue. That's money that was not appropriated from the taxpayers. It's different. It's not public funds under the terms or under the definition of the Constitution.
The need for more energy generation in the state is also a focus of a major bill going through the House. There's even talk of reviving the $9 billion VC Summer nuclear plant expansion boondoggle.
Santee Cooper does not plan to be the owner, nor do we intend to be the operator of whatever comes there. We do believe there are groups out there that are interested in potentially completing the work at VC Summer.
The promising tone of the week shifted after a forensic audit on the $1.8 billion accounting error involving the Comptroller General, Auditor, and Treasurer's offices was released. The governor and legislators weighed in.
We hope that those investigators will understand what happened, and because it was an accounting error and no criminal conduct, no wrongful intent, no intent to make an error at all.
We suspected where it originated. That's what we publicized. We've introduced legislation at least with the auditor's office, and we expect to release or introduce some legislation fairly soon that would follow some of the recommendations of the forensic auditing team.
I just filed articles of impeachment to begin the process of removing our current treasurer, Curtis Loftus, from office. What we have discovered is years of sweeping accounting errors under the rug in hopes that they would just disappear. We have currently to date spent millions of dollars because of his errors. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars each month on lawyer fees and auditor fees. And to correct these issues is going to cost us even more.
And I think we've got to go through this, and we've got to find out who made mistakes and why they made mistakes, and we have anecdotal evidence of that, but we need to hear from the players in this to find out what and why all this occurred.
Treasurer Curtis Loftus said his office will comply with recommendations as necessary.
I want to reassure you, the citizens of South Carolina, that you can be confident that the state's money is safe.
This will be an issue that dominates the coming weeks of session as the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation remains ongoing and could negatively impact the state's credit ratings. Next week, lawmakers will be in perfunctory session as they hold committee hearings to get bills on their respective chambers' calendars for debate. SCETV is committed to keeping you informed of the state legislative process. And to do that, I encourage you to check out the State House Gavel, our blog on scetv.org/news that keeps you up to date Tuesday through Friday on meetings, action, news, and all things State House. You can also catch the South Carolina Lead podcast every Tuesday and Saturday. And of course, tune into This Week in South Carolina on air or on youtube.com/South Carolina ETV. For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.